and this is very wonderful, and thank you for sharing. That was very beautiful and very concise. Very beautiful. Feel very privileged to be here, have butterflies in my stomach, kind of nervous. I just sit in this room and I look around and I just, you guys have just done so good. I mean, it's just all these little signs around here. It just really touches me very deeply. I'm just really glad to be here at your first convention. About a little over 60 years ago, there was an addict. I like this to speak about addicts. I believe in the disease of addiction. I don't believe in, I believe there's one disease, it's addiction. And a little over 60 years ago, there was people like us that had no place to go. I mean, literally, they did die, or they ended up in institutions, mental institutions for the rest of their lives. And what happened is somebody like me and you wandered into this very famous psychologist's office named Carl Jung, and he went to him for help because he was a hopeless addict like you and I, and his life was falling apart. He had lost everything, all that stuff. We know what that feels like. And this psychologist, nobody had been able to help people like us, in other words, and this guy was, wise enough and honest enough to tell him, I got news for you. I got bad news. The bad news is I can't do anything for you. The good news is that I've seen people like you change, that have gone through a profound personality change brought on by a spiritual experience. And that is how the 12 steps were born. Of course we know that, Alcoholics Anonymous was founded on that principle from that day. That started, that energy, that thing started a chain of events to where the 12 steps were brought about, and Alcoholics Anonymous was born. And in 1953, Narcotics Anonymous began. But that's, the way this thing started, and I really believe in that principle that the only way that we can get clean, people like us, I identify myself as an addict when I stood up here. I can't label you or anyone else as an addict, but an addict of my type, the hopeless variety, the only way we've ever found any kind of recovery, and it's like you were saying, to be able to live in the world and not be institutionalized, is to go through this profound personality change that is brought on by a spiritual experience. And I believe that that's what the 12 steps are all about. Anything, of course, that I say is completely my opinion, and I always, even go a little bit further and let you know that that opinion changes, because I'm still working the steps. And what I conceive the steps to be today and what I conceive my spiritual life to be today has changed over the years in this program, and that's from working these 12 steps. In my very early recovery, when I came into recovery, I had nothing. I was 27 years old when I got clean. I found the program when I was about 24 years old. I went to my first meeting in 1968. And bounced in and out for 3 more years. And when I came in out of the 60s, in other words. And I don't know what was going on in India in the 60s, but I'll tell you what was going on in the U.S. in the 60s. There's a lot of LSD, and all the gurus from India were coming to the West, And what happened is I was taking these high doses of LSD, and I was reading about these gurus, and they were talking about this love and this light within. And I wanted that. And I used to take handfuls of LSD and sit on the beach at night and wait to see the light. Well, I saw the light, I'll tell you that. But I came down all the time, I always came down. And I know that when I came in the program, I came from that lifestyle. If I wasn't shooting heroin or shooting cocaine, I thought I was doing something good by just smoking hash and taking LSD for spiritual reasons. So when I came in this program, the God thing didn't scare me. It didn't scare me. I wanted that. I wanted something different. All I knew is that I was taking drugs. I'll tell you the reason I took drugs is because I was separated from life. I didn't take drugs because I was a hippie. I took drugs for the simple fact that the first day my parents dropped me off at nursery school, and I walked into my first day at school, and I was sitting in a room like this with my peers. All of a sudden I knew all of you had it together, and I didn't. I knew every other kid in the classroom knew what the teacher was talking about, and I didn't. And that's addiction. Addiction is separation. Recovery is intimacy. When I'm separated from my higher power, I'm in my addiction. When I'm feeling intimacy with my higher power, I'm in recovery. And you're my barometer. If I feel separated from you, I feel separated from God. If I have intimacy with you, I have intimacy with God. It's just real simple. I keep it real simple that way. The disease of addiction is about separation, about shame, about knowing that I'm not enough. And that's why I use drugs to take away those feelings. Not because I was a hippie in the 60s, but because I was full of shame and separation, and the drugs made me feel okay for a little while. So anyway, when I went to my first meeting and I started hearing people talk about this stuff, I wasn't scared of the God thing. My first few years of recovery, what I thought it was like to be spiritual, and literally I think I've had many lifetimes in India. Because I thought to be spiritual I had to wear a loincloth, and walk around. In my very early recovery, I took vows to go barefoot. I saw this movie, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, about the story of St. Francis of Assisi. And in the movie, he went barefooted in the snow. So I had about 2 years clean, and I was on the East Coast in Virginia, where it snows during the winter. I went barefooted all winter because St. Francis did. This is in recovery, I took the vows of celibacy for 2 years. No masturbation, nothing. If I had a wet dream, I knew God got me off, and it was okay. But I was very serious about this stuff. This was my life, living the spiritual life. I wanted it. Today I don't have to do that. Today I don't have to wear. I wouldn't mind doing that, though. I would like to come someday, maybe after I'm retired, maybe I can come to India and live in a cave for a while. It's always been a desire. I think I've done it before in other lifetimes, but anyway, today I don't have to do that to live a spiritual life is what I'm getting at. It's changed somewhat. And I'm learning this through the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous. My belief is simply like this, that the 12 steps, I believe that the 11th step is the catalyst for recovery. I believe the 11th step is where we get that conscious contact with our higher power. I believe that the first 10 steps set me up for being open to God's guidance. And I believe the 12th step is simply a summary of what just happened if I work the first 11 steps. Having had a spiritual awakening, and we try to carry this message. I even like to keep it simpler. What is the message? The message is the spiritual awakening. That's what happens after I work the 12 steps. So I believe that in my life, that if I want to keep experiencing this profound personality change, if I want to stay sitting in these rooms and keep growing in this relationship with a higher power, that I have got to, in fact, keep going through the steps. I take recovery very serious. Last night they had an H&I meeting in here. That's been a very big part of my recovery for over 10 years. In the prisons all the time. Carrying this message. That we have found a way up and out. I think that's a very important service thing in Narcotics Anonymous is the prison work. But, for me, every time, I just celebrated, 24 years clean in October. And I'm going through the steps right now. Thank you. That was all one day at a time, And I just started a new session of the steps. What I'm trying to get across is I haven't gotten to that place yet where I got it together. Maybe it'll happen when I'm 25 years, 30, I don't know. But at this stage, 24 years clean, I do not have it together. It's very important that I come to these meetings. It's very important that I work these 12 steps. And what happens with me is that when I go through the steps, I sponsor a lot of men in America, on the mainland, from the East Coast to the West Coast, and in Hawaii, on all the different islands. And every time I go through the steps with another addict, it's like going through the steps myself. It's very beautiful. I was mentioning to Sunil that I was privileged to be on the committee that wrote the step book, How It Works and Why. And for 2.5 years, I flew to Los Angeles every 4 to 6 weeks. And what that was like is there was a group of us. And to me, I didn't think it was work. It was like being we would start on Friday and we would end on Sunday, and we'd work long hours. And it was like being in a big workshop on the steps all weekend long. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience for me to go through that for 2.5 years. I mean, we just lived and breathed the steps, for those 2.5 years. It was quite a privilege, and I, thank my higher power for letting me participate in that type of service. But so for me, when a newcomer comes in and they go through the steps the first time, it's real obvious. You're kind of pinpointing addiction as well. I used too much, and this, I was powerless over those different drugs and stuff like that. But what's wonderful about Narcotics Anonymous is that our first step does say we're powerless over our addiction. It doesn't say I'm powerless over marijuana, heroin, alcohol, anything else. It says addiction. And for me today, after you go through the steps a few times, you go, well, I always ask my sponsees when they write out the steps, that's how I do it. I have them write step 1. What does that mean to you when it says I'm powerless over my addiction and my life's become unmanageable? What does addiction mean 5 years later? What does it mean after you've been clean for 5 years that I'm powerless over? What is addiction today in your life, For me, it's anything that separates me from you. It's just that simple. That's what I keep. Anything that gets in the way of our intimacy, I'm using as addiction. I'm using to keep me separated. That I've got to look at that. And for me, I've got to do that if I'm going to keep growing. I've got to fine tune and keep this up. And I always ask my sponsees to, because see, step 1 says we're powerless over our addiction, our lives that come unmanageable. And those are very beautiful words. But saying those words is not what moves me on to step 2. When I take taking that is what I ask people to do, and what I try to do myself is when I'm writing out, what do those words mean to me? What does it mean I'm powerless over my addiction? What does it mean that my life's unmanageable? And what does it mean today? Not what it meant 24 years ago, but what does it mean today? And what spiritual principles are in this step? In other words, because see, I believe that I lived by certain principles in my life. And when I was using, it was like lying to you, getting what I could get, me, I come first, cheating, stealing, all that kind of stuff were the principles I lived by. I didn't know how to live any other way. I resented everyone. I judged everyone. I felt separated from everyone. That was what my life consisted of. Those were the principles I lived by. So, in fact, what is step 1 saying to me? What are the principles? Because you know why? When I incorporate those principles in my life, that's how I'm going to change. That's how I change, by starting to work. The 12 steps says, in practicing these principles in all of our affairs. Well, we have right up on the wall here, honesty, open-minded, and in willingness. And those we hear about all the time. But I said to myself, there's got to be more principles than that. What are they talking about? So when we wrote the step book this time, if you read How It Works and Why and study that each step, you will find principles named in there. And there might be certain ones that you feel like are appropriate this time for you. To me, surrender is what step 1's about. Surrender at 24 years clean, at 10 days clean, at 1 day clean, at whatever. When I go through the steps, I've got to look at surrender again. If you're going to be on any spiritual path, surrender is absolutely necessary, the way I look at it. You know, that I can't, if I don't get out of the way a little bit more, God can't come in. You know, so I take that principle and I look at it and I apply it to my life today. And I pray to get in touch with that surrender. And I pray, step one's all about, when I walked in these rooms, step one was all about despair and hopelessness. And that's where it left me. Today, my life is wonderful, it's good, but I still, when I go through step one, I try to get in touch with despair and hopelessness again, at some level. Because if I can get to that place where in an area of my life where I don't have it together and I need to grow, I can feel that hopelessness and I can surrender then, so I can move on to step two. You know, and every time I work a principle in one step, I believe it goes with me to step two. You know, I believe that surrender goes with me to step two. You know, and I come to believe in a power greater than myself. I really believe, you know, and then surrender comes with me there. And whatever I feel like I've got to work on in step two, I read step two, I study it, what principles are in there. Maybe trust. Maybe I've got to trust this time or something, you know. Trust that, yes, if I surrender, that this higher power will come into my life, you know. So surrender goes with me again. You know, and as I go through the steps, each principle goes with me to the next step and it gets a little deeper. So hopefully by the time I'm to step 12 and step 11, especially step 11, that there's a really nice surrender. There's a nice trust going on. There's faith that I find in step 3, you know, honesty in step 4, and on and on and on, the way this thing works, you know. And by the time I get there, that these principles have incorporated themselves into my life a little more. And once again, maybe I look and approach life in a little different way. You know, maybe I'm trying to be a little more honest and dishonest. And hopefully I can love a little more, you know. I was talking to Simon outside, and you know, through the time that I've been in this program and working these 12 steps, like I said, I've changed. You know, I actually do have a spiritual teacher, a guru that was actually born in Calcutta, Guruji Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote the autobiography of a yogi, and I've followed his technique for many years. And I actually went to his house yesterday. That was very special. But I've practiced many things, but I love what His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, says. He says, you know, his religion is kindness, compassion, and love. You know, if I can learn that a little more kindness, a little more compassion, and a little more love every time I go through the 12 steps, what else can I ask for? You know, what else can I ask for? That's what I want in my life. I know the other way doesn't work. You know, and I've also fulfilled a lot of desires in this program. I have a very wonderful, beautiful marriage to a very wonderful, beautiful woman who is in this program. You know, I couldn't ask for more. I have a 28-year-old daughter who is celebrating 7 years in Narcotics Anonymous this month. I have a 26-year-old son who will be celebrating 4 years this June in Narcotics Anonymous. I'm blessed. You know, I'm blessed. I have my own business. My workers, a lot of them are in recovery. And if they're not in recovery, when they come to me, I think, you know, you're not here to earn money. You're here to learn about the spiritual principles of Narcotics Anonymous. You know? I was telling everybody in the U.S., after I speak wherever, at a convention or anywhere, as I end, I go namaste to everyone. I have namaste written on my company shirts. You know, I'm so happy to be in the land of namaste now. You know what I mean? I love it, you know. And I love what Rajneesh said last night. Namaste means N-A, must stay. I love that. Very beautiful. I love that. But my whole life is this. You know? And the neat thing about it, having a wonderful wife, a wonderful family, and a somewhat successful business, what happened with getting that stuff, and not even trying to get it, you know, believe me, that's a grace from working the 12 steps, that's all I can tell you, is that I know that that's not what does it to me. You know, that I have got to have a relationship with a higher power. If I don't, I can't enjoy having a beautiful marriage. You know, I can't enjoy having wonderful children unless I'm clean and I have a God in my life. I really, really feel that, you know, that's the most important thing in my life. And I'll tell you, I went through a lot of stuff. I've been through a lot of stuff in recovery, and I'd like to share with you a little bit how I got clean. Is that I was living on the north shore of Oahu, and like I said, it was in the 60s, and we were just taking lots of drugs and stuff like this, and one day a lady moved in next door to me, and there was like this buzz in the neighborhood that this weird lady had moved in, you know. And what happened is that this lady was guided in meditation to come to this house on the north shore, and what she did is she walked up, and she reached above the door and found the key and moved in. That weekend, the real estate company came out because the house was for rent. And they found her in there. And they said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "God told me to come here." She said, "Can you please have the electricity turned on?" You know? So, anyway, that woman was in the... happened to be 8 years clean in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous at that time. And God did lead her to that house. Because myself and a bunch of other so-called hippies were living on the North Shore then. We were all addicts. And what happened is this woman started a meeting, you know, and I went to it. And that's how I found this thing. And this woman lived her life. That was my first sponsor. I spent 10 years with her. She died in 1978, but with 18 years clean. And what she did, she really did meditate every morning. And she followed her whole life on that guidance, what happened each morning. Whatever God told her to do. She was very, very tuned in, very beautiful woman. What happened, and I always share this story just because I always like to honor her, you know, whenever I share, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be clean. And there's a whole bunch of people that wouldn't be clean if it wasn't for her. And I like to honor her and share a little bit about her whenever I share. And I had a friend of mine, after that period, I went back to California for about a few months. And at this point, I'd gone to a meeting in 1968, and I bounced in and out, like I said, for 3 more years. Well, I went home to California, and a very good friend of mine who I used to shoot a lot of dope with, was very, I was okay, I thought, because he was my friend, and he was really out there. Well, he had just gotten out of a mental institution, and he couldn't even talk, literally. He just kind of stuttered all the time. And he came to me and he says, "I want to go to Hawaii." And I said, "Well, go to the North Shore. That's where it's happening. That's where, the North Shore is where all the surfing is done." Probably everybody's heard that Hawaii is real big in surfing, and the Banzai Pipeline and Waimea Bay and all these big waves that they surf. Well, that's the North Shore of Hawaii. So I said, "Go there. That's where everybody's hanging out, And I told him about this woman. I told him about the program, and I showed him a picture of her, and she was very different looking, very long, grayish hair, and everything like that. If you saw her, when I was looking at Mother Teresa today, Mother Teresa reminded me of my sponsor, Flowbird, kind of. But anyway, so I showed him a picture of her, and so he offs to Hawaii, and he lands there real late at night, and he hitchhikes out to the North Shore. So he gets out, and he's thinking that Hawaii is this little island you can ride a bicycle around in, and everybody lives in grass shacks. Well, that's not how it is, It's just not the way it is. So he gets out to the North Shore at 1 o'clock in the morning, very late. He falls asleep on the beach, and he wakes up the next morning early, and he's going, "Man, what am I doing? I have no money. Here I am. I have no dope. I'm strung out. What am I going to do? I've really blown it this time." He's just like going, "What have I done?" Okay, Flowbird is a mile up the beach. She's in meditation. God says, "Go to Sunset Point right now." So there's other recovering addicts living in the house. She gets up and says, "Get the car started. I got to go to the beach." And they lived right across the street from the beach. And they said, "Well, just Walk across the street. There's the beach. She says, no, go, the car started. I've got to go to Sunset Point right now. So she gets in the car and she drives down there and she walks out on the sand and out on the ocean and goes, okay, God, here I am. What do you want? You know, and meantime, my friend Tom had just woken up and is going, what am I doing here, you know? And he looks up and here's this lady that I'd shown him a picture of. And he's going, so he walks up and he stutters. He can't even talk. He goes, Mama, and she hears my name, Tom or something. She goes, well, you're why I'm here. She says, put your stuff in the car, and she took him home. That was 27 years ago, and he's never been loaded since. You know, and that's how she touched lives. You know, and that's what this program's about to me. What happened with her is that I found out that the only reason I'm on the planet is to carry this message. Like you said, the only reason I'm on the planet is to carry the message of Narcotics Anonymous. That is it. 6 years ago, in my meditation, I was led to Calcutta. I'd never been to India before, and I didn't want to come to Calcutta. You know, I had friends going down south, and I said, wow, I'll go with you, you know. But my meditation said go to Calcutta. And all I knew is I wanted to come here and work with addicts, meet addicts, I didn't even know if NA was here. You know, and I got off the plane, and I went and got a hotel room, and I went to one of the rickshaw drivers, and I said, take me to Mother Teresa's. I wanted to meet Mother Teresa. You know, and I went there, and I said, where are the addicts? You know, and this one nun took me around. Now granted, I just landed in Calcutta at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1:30, never been here. This is a very big city. I don't know if you know that. Very intense if you just came from America. Very intense, okay? Never been to India before. Didn't know where NA was, didn't know anything. 1:30 in the afternoon I land. I end up at Mother Teresa's. A nun takes me around, shows me the orphanage, shows me the death and dying place, and I say, I want to find the addicts. She didn't know where anything about that was. Somewhere, I guess, she had heard something or knew somebody that worked with alcoholics. And she took me to their house, and it turned out it was June, and her husband runs St. Joseph's, I guess, or something, yeah. And I said, I'm looking for the addicts. And she said, in 1 hour, a meeting is starting across the street. She lived right by Ripon Street. So there I was led to Narcotics Anonymous. 5 hours after I got off the plane almost, you know. And that, I was only here a week. But it touched my life. It changed my life. When I got home, I couldn't talk about it. I'd cry. Because of what you guys are doing here. We have it so easy in America and in Europe. So easy. You know? One of the addicts took me to his house, and I couldn't believe it. You know, I know some of you heard the tape I did in Sydney. It just blew me away. I've wanted to come back ever since then. You know? And I'm here, and I can't believe this is happening. You guys are so beautiful. You've got a gift. And it's growing, it's expanding. You know, it's so wonderful. You know, what these 12 steps do for us are beyond anything we can even imagine. I had nothing when I walked in this program. Keith, a member of Narcotics Anonymous, he was the one that took me to his house. It was no bigger than my bathroom at home, and it had a dirt floor, and he lived there with his wife and the kids. And he told me, I want to work, I want a job, I want to do this, I don't know what to do, what do I do? And what do I say to somebody like that? I didn't know what to say. You know, I just started opening my mouth. All I know is that day he took me to the airport, we talked a lot. I was in the throes of getting very bad dysentery at the time. I had a high fever. I don't know what I said to him, but I just talked, you know. But bottom line, I said, you know what? St. Joseph Treatment Center is an hour from here. Go out there. If you don't have a job, go out there and sit with the addicts and carry the message. I don't know what else to say. All I said is, if you do this, you will be provided for. Well, all I know now is it's 6, 7 years later, and I hear he's still clean. And I hear he's working in New Delhi. Things changed. I had nothing when I came in this program. When I met my wife, I lived in a one-room little house myself. I had nothing. I was the only one in my whole company. I was the tomcat in painting. I painted houses, and I had like 12 years clean. And that's when I started getting involved with World Service then. And I became an RSR, and I went to the World Service Conference. From there, I was on the World H&I Committee for a year. And then I was asked to get on the STEP Committee. And what I did is I just threw myself into service in this program. I didn't have time to think about, was I supposed to marry B? Was I supposed to find a girlfriend? Was I supposed to have my business grow? I didn't even care about that stuff anymore. I just embraced this program. And I worked these steps in my life. And what happened is that things grew. Things have changed because of the 12 steps. And things may change again. All that stuff. I live an hour from my house. There's an active volcano. I might lose everything again. Who knows? But I won't lose my recovery. Our house today is open. It's a program house. It's always got people there. We hold a meeting in our house. We have visitors come through. We have people come to our house to work the steps. It's God's house. It's a beautiful house. But I wouldn't be able to enjoy it if I didn't give it away. I wouldn't be able to enjoy my life if I tried to keep, if I just tried to possess my wife and have our love and just never let anyone in my house because I didn't want you to interfere. I wouldn't be able to enjoy it. My prayer today is, please, God, send someone to interfere in my life. Because if I get too comfortable, I get complacent. I've been through that. When I was 8 years clean, I got married. See, I went through those, I took those vows of celibacy. I really meant it. And for my first 8 years, I was single. I wanted a soulmate. Yeah, I wanted to meet somebody really bad after a while. But once I did meet somebody, slowly but surely, from 8 years clean to 12 years clean, I was going to meetings, I was doing all this stuff. But what happened is all of a sudden, I got married, my business, I had a business, and all of a sudden, God, I better not go to and I also got into marathon running, where you run long distance running marathons, And all of a sudden, I was married, and people would ask, would you sponsor me? And I'd go, yeah, but I said, don't call too late because I go to bed early, or I couldn't go to a meeting one night maybe because I wanted to get laid, Maybe if I stay home I'll get laid, So all that stuff started becoming more important. I didn't realize it. But all of a sudden, at 12 years clean, I went through a divorce. And all of a sudden, I had a hole in my gut so big because of what had happened is that in those few years that I just started, what happened is I would do some step work. I would kind of get bummed out about something, so I'd write out a 4th step, and then I'd go to somebody and give away a 5th step. But that's all I did. I didn't start on step 1 and end up on step 12. I did 4 and 5. And anyway, I just ended up in this place. I got a divorce, my wife left, and I found a big hole in my gut. That was 12 years clean. And all of a sudden, I was walking into Narcotics Anonymous meetings in Hawaii, where I helped start NA. I went to the first NA meeting in Hawaii. We started NA in Hawaii in 1973. And all of a sudden, I was feeling like I wasn't a part of it, because I had put other things ahead of God without even knowing it. It happened so subtly. So subtly. All of a sudden, you get clean, and you're supposed to get clean. And all of a sudden, life starts working. It's supposed to get better. That's the idea. But all of a sudden, what happens to a lot of us is and all of a sudden, we don't have time for meetings. We don't have time for this. And that started to happen to me. And all I know is at 12 years clean, I went through the steps again, and I started on step 1, and I ended up on step 12. And when I ended up on step 12, it was so profound that my whole life was going one direction and it was just catapulted and boom, going another direction, and it's never changed since. Like I said, what happened then at 12 years clean is I quit surrendering to my disease and I surrendered to recovery. And I embraced this program like I wasn't more than a newcomer. My life changed so profoundly that I became a militant on talking about the steps. You know, he said it. This isn't a meeting program. This is a 12-step program. This is about working the steps. We can stay clean so long, probably coming to meetings and hearing about this stuff with a little bit of osmosis. And we can even start living the steps. If you've been going to meetings long enough, all of a sudden you get in an argument with your wife or your friend and you'll go, you'll go up and make amends. You hear about that in the meetings. We make amends. So all of a sudden you're doing that kind of stuff. And you're just kind of living the steps. But living the steps is not the same as working the steps. For me. And I want to keep saying that because I don't want to be up here going, rah, rah, rah. But this is what worked for me. I'm talking from experience. I got there and I found a hole in my gut at 12 years clean. And I went through the steps again, and since that day I just am addicted to going through the steps. I go through the steps on certain areas of my life now. I'm going through the steps on a very profound thing right now, the session I'm going through right now, that I haven't really shared too many people with, but I'll just tell you, and it may not make sense to you, but what I'm going through the steps on right now is what I have to do to complete this incarnation and prepare for my next one. That's heavy stuff. I used to say, I don't want to come back. I don't want to go through this again on this planet. But now I do. I want to come back and keep helping till everyone wakes up. That's my vow today. That's what I'm working the steps on. That's pretty deep stuff, and the steps do that. This stuff, we're not limited in this program. This program's if this program was only about just staying clean, I would not still be here. I would not still be here. But this program is about love. It's about joy. It's about this relationship with God. It's about the spiritual awakening. I believe that as I work these I believe steps 1, 2, and 3 are the foundations. They're about the surrender. They're about really coming to believe and having that. I believe for me that I get in touch with surrender, trust, and faith in the first 3 steps. And then I believe what happens is I go through steps 4 through 10, and they're the action steps. I write that moral inventory. For me, when I'm working with a sponsee that's new, I say, write your emotional life story. Your emotional life story. Not necessarily the war stories, but your emotions behind them, the feelings, like our friend from Bombay was the sexual abuse. What did that feel like? He carried that hurt with him the whole time. He carried that resentment. That's what we do. We go through these things and we carry that pain, we carry that resentment with us our whole life until we learn how to dump it. So we want our emotional life story down there. It's the inventory of what our life has been like. I tell people, if you have trouble getting writing, I want you write down the worst thing that you ever did. The thing that you would never tell anyone. That's a good way to unlock the flow of getting started. We have to get honest. We have to do it, or we die. And then when we go to our sponsor with step 5, we tell all this. We dump this stuff. And then as I'm listening, when I listen to a 5th step with somebody I'm listening to a 5th step with, I always tell them ahead of time, I'm going to have a pencil and paper. So I don't want you to think that I'm writing down your secrets to go tell someone. What I'm doing is I'm starting your character defect list. And I'm starting your list of amends. Because that's where the amends list and the character defects come from, is from what we get in touch with in the 5th step. So as they leave my house, I give them a list. There's the beginning of your amends, there's the beginning of your character defects, and we can elaborate on this now. And I tell them for step 6, I want you to because see, another word for character defects that I just love that's in the step book, if you read step 6 in the step book, is survival skills. And that really defines it in a different way. Because what that says is that the reason I was living in these character defects is for my own survival. I was so scared, so shameful, so full of fear of life that I needed these to protect myself. They were my armor. They distracted me. The character defects are no different than my using. Using is a character defect. It's one of the character defects. When drugs and alcohol, when the obsession to use drugs was removed from my life, that was like one of the first character defects that got removed from my life. And then as I go on, the rest have to, because that was an armor. They're all an armor. And if you really look at a lot of the character defects, they're God-given instincts. You know, there's nothing wrong with lust. Any long-term marriage, get married and stay married 20, 25 years. If you don't have a little lust in your marriage, it's going to be dead. You know, there's nothing wrong with a little. You know what I mean? There's a boundary. But if you're walking around in your neighbor's backyard, looking in the window, jacking off, you know, something's gone over it. Lust has gone over the invisible line somewhere. You know what I mean? I don't think that's what they meant by you know what I mean? So you need to find out where the balance is. Where have I gone over the invisible line? Now, do I still need this survival skill in my life? That's what I ask my sponsees to answer these certain questions. Where do I remember this character defect first starting in my life? You know, go back. Where do I remember this first happening? And then ask yourself, what was I getting out of it?